They always said Sycamore Ridge was peaceful, quiet, safe, and far from the noise of city life. But that peace shattered the moment David Palmer heard the tires scream. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday when David, sitting in his home office, heard a loud banklangest from outside, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your mind even catches up. He shot up from his chair and ran toward the front door. By the time he made it to the driveway, his daughter's car, her brand-new Toyota Corolla, was limping down the road, sparks flying from the bare metal rims. The rubber from all four tires had been shredded to ribbons. His daughter, 17-year-old Emily, pulled over in a panic and jumped out, her face pale and eyes wide. "Dad, I didn't even see anything. I just turned onto the road like I always do, and then boom." David rushed over and hugged her. "You're okay. That's what matters." But as he looked down the slope of Sycamore Ridge, his own privately maintained road, he saw it. Small, sharp steel teeth glinting in the moonlight, spike strips. Two of them, lined perfectly across the road, right at the bend. He blinked. "Who the hell put those there?" Emily whispered, "I think it was them." She pointed toward the small path leading back to the main road. A golf cart was slowly rolling away in the shadows, barely visible in the dim light. David squinted and then he saw it. Red and blue lights. Mounted on the roof. The cart took a sharp turn and vanished. David's heart was pounding now, not from fear, but fury. What David didn't know was that this was just the start. The HOA had gone rogue and they weren't pretending anymore. The next morning, David was already outside at 6 a.m., armed with a flashlight and his security system app. He scrubbed through the footage. And there it was, clear as daylight. The HOA golf cart had parked at the bottom of the bend at 9:32 p.m. Two men wearing dark blue shirts, with something that looked suspiciously like badges, hopped out and laid down the spike strips like they were doing official police work. One of them even held a clipboard. David paused the frame and zoomed in. It was Carl Becker, HOA president. He didn't just recognize the face, he recognized the smirk. David's wife Lisa stood behind him. "You're telling me the HOA is laying traps now?" "On our road," David nodded. "This is our private property. They have no authority down here." "Then why are they acting like they do?" she said. Later that morning, David stormed into the HOA office. The air smelled of artificial citrus and cheap coffee. Behind the desk sat Carl Becker, in a blue polo with an embroidered patch that said, Sycamore Ridge Enforcement Division. Carl didn't even flinch when David walked in, holding up a printed photo of the spike strips. "Care to explain this?" Carl looked at the photo and then smiled. "Mr. Palmer, it's a speed mitigation tool. Several residents complained about excessive teenage driving. The board voted on it. This is a private road. You're not the police. You can't lay down spike strips." Carl tapped his badge. "I'm not the police. I'm HOA enforcement. We're allowed to act in defense of community safety." David blinked. "That's not a thing. You made that up." Carl stood slowly. "Residents who interfere with safety operations may be subject to penalty under the bylaws. Section 12.4.2. David's jaw tightened. "You're going to regret this, Carl?" Carl leaned in. "Not if you keep speeding, I won't." David left the office, seething. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. And as he passed the clubhouse on the way out, he saw something that made his blood run colder than anything Carl had said. On the back patio, stacked neatly against the wall, were 3 more boxes labeled Tire Deterrents, Authorized Units, 4. The HOA wasn't just improvising, they were preparing. Have you ever seen an HOA go this far? Would you stand by or fight back? Drop a comment, hit that like, and stick around. Because David's fight is just beginning. Most HOAs mail warnings, send emails, or at worst, stick pink violation notes on your garage. But at Sycamore Ridge, they weren't just pushing paper anymore, they were laying down law. Or at least, pretending to. It was the morning after the spike strip incident when David sat down at his dining table. Flipping through the HOA handbook with a red pen, Lisa poured coffee but didn't sit. She was tense, pacing. "Did you call the sheriff's office?" she asked. David nodded. "They laughed, thought I was joking. Said, unless they're impersonating a real cop, there's nothing criminal here. Civil matter, they called it." "So what? They can wear badges now. Block roads. Damage private vehicles." David didn't answer. Instead, he slid his laptop across the table. On screen was a paused YouTube video titled, Fake HOA Police. Watch what happens. The thumbnail was grainy footage from their security cam. Carl Becker in full HOA enforcement gear, laying down spikes like he was in a movie. David had uploaded it late last night. In just a few hours, it already had over 8,000 views. Comments poured in. Is this legal? Sue them. Looks like a cult with clipboards. Lisa stared. You went public. They made it public the second they set up a checkpoint on my driveway. The next day, retaliation came swiftly. Lisa walked down to the community mailbox, only to find it padlocked shut. A handwritten note taped on the slot read, Box temporarily restricted for non-compliance, HOA security. And that was just the beginning. David got an email with a digital citation, Violation 38B Community, defamation through unauthorized media distribution, fine, $2,000 status. Unpaid. Attached was a still from his own YouTube video. Lisa's phone buzzed next. A message from the community pool system, access denied, resident suspended pending board review. The tennis courts followed. Then the community app. David checked his household profile had been flagged red. They were digitally erasing them. That evening, David met with his old friend Kyle in the garage. Kyle, retired from the State Highway Patrol, was a man who knew the land, how to follow it to the letter. He watched the video and flipped through the HOA manual. They're impersonating authority, Kyle said. Now, they might technically avoid criminal charges. But hear this clause. He pointed at a footnote. Security officers must be contracted by a state-licensed firm and approved via board vote and municipal review. Kyle raised an eyebrow. You ever vote on this? David shook his head. Never saw it on any agenda. Kyle smiled. Then they're running rogue. But the icing on the insanity came the next morning. David stepped out to check his driveway. His new trash bins last week were gone. He walked 3 houses down. Nothing, 5 houses. Still nothing. At the community entrance stood a trailer with all the neighborhood's trash. Bins stacked inside like trophies, and next to the trailer stood Martin Rhodes, HOA vice president, in full uniform. Patch, badge, mirrored sunglasses. When David approached, Martin gave a cold smile. Waste privileges suspended. Until your anti-HOA activity is corrected. Anti what? David said. I'm a resident, you're not cops. Martin pointed at the badge. We're community enforcement, sir. David laughed bitterly. You're wearing knockoff uniforms and stealing trash cans. Martin leaned in. You're lucky we don't. Tow your car next. Later that day, Lisa picked up Emily from school. As they pulled into their own driveway, she slowed the car down and froze. A white stripe had been spray-painted across the entrance to their driveway, and next to it, on a wooden stake, a warning sign, under safety watch, speed monitored by HOA force. David came outside and stared in disbelief. They weren't enforcing rules, they were waging psychological warfare. That night, David made a decision. They want to fight, he told Kyle. They're gonna get it, but first, he needed to find out how Carl Becker got that bajand, whether there was a paper trail behind his so-called enforcement division, because one thing was clear, this wasn't just about HOA politics anymore. This was about power, control and intimidation wrapped in a golf cart with flashing lights, and David Palmer wasn't backing down. Have you ever been bullied by a fake authority? Drop your HOA horror story in the comments. Smash that subscribe because Carl's badge, David's about to rip it right off. David Palmer wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just a man who paid his taxes, maintained his property, and expected to be left alone. But after the spike strips, the fines, the access bans, and now a driveway painted with warnings, he understood what was really happening. This wasn't neighborhood safety, it was a hostile takeover by the people who were supposed to serve the community. That Saturday morning, Kyle arrived at David's house with a beat-up briefcase and a smirk. He dropped it on the kitchen counter. Remember my cousin Judy? Kyle asked. Used to work in private security admin before she retired. David nodded, double quotes well. She pulled some favors. That Sycamore Ridge Enforcement Division, turns out it's not just a made-up name. It's actually registered in the state as an LLC. David opened the folder and scanned the paperwork. Peacewell Safety Solutions, LLC. Owner, Carl Becker. Officers listed, Martin Rhodes and Susan Tate. Late Susan, Lisa asked. That's the treasurer of the HOA. Exactly, Kyle said. They created their own security company. gave it a name that sounds official, and are billing it through HOA dues. David rubbed his temples. So we're paying them to harass us? Kyle nodded. And because they're technically a registered private firm, the sheriff's office has to treat them like any other contractor. David looked up, unless we prove they weren't authorized by the board. They spent the rest of the weekend combing through old HOA meeting minutes, all available online public records. Nothing. No agenda items about private security. No budget discussions. No vote records. But then, Kyle found something buried in a scanned PDF from 6 months earlier. Line 42. Security Consulting Services. Initial setup payment. $18,2 vendor. PSS LLC. Lisa narrowed her eyes. 18 grand. For what, exactly? Kyle grinned. That's what we're going to find out. David called a lawyer on Monday morning. By afternoon, he'd filed a formal request for an audit of HOA funds under the state's HOA Transparency Act. Legally, the board had 10 days to comply. But retaliation didn't wait that long. That evening, as Lisa drove to her job at the local library, she felt something was wrong. The car didn't accelerate normally. A dragging sound. She pulled over. 3 of her tires had been slashed clean, precise cuts. David got the call and rushed out. By the time he arrived, Lisa was sitting on the curb with a state trooper. The trooper frowned. No cameras nearby. But this isn't a random thing. These are exact cuts. Somebody wanted to make a point. David clenched his fists. I think they already did. The next day, a neighbor quietly rang David's doorbell. Her name was Marcy Talbot, mid-50s, lived alone, worked nights. She looked nervous. I saw something, she said. Thought I should say. David invited her in. Marcy sipped from a mug, Lisa offered, then whispered, it was 2 nights ago. Around 1:30 a.m. I saw someone sneaking under your wife's car. Small flashlight hoodie. But when he turned to leave, I recognized the walk. It was Martin. David's jaw tightened. Are you willing to say that on the record? He asked. Marcy hesitated, then nodded. Yes, they're scaring everyone. Somebody has to stand up. Kyle set up a secure cloud folder. They uploaded everything. Videos, scanned documents, statements, and screenshots of HOA policies. The folder had one name, Fake Sheriff Files. Meanwhile, David's video had crossed 80,000 views online. Commenters were sharing stories, tagging local news stations, and demanding legal action. Then, an anonymous email arrived in David's inbox. No subject, no text, just one PDF attachment. He opened it. It was a manual labeled Community Enforcement Protocols Volume 3, confidential. Inside were shocking pages. Instructions for tire deterrent deployment. Dress codes for visual authority consistency. Phrases to use when confronting residents. You're in violation of Article 14, and this is being documented. For board review, and this line. Maintain official tone. Residents respond to authority, not negotiation. David stared at the screen. This isn't a policy book. It's a playbook. At that moment, it was no longer just about fighting. Back, it was about exposure. The board had created its own wrote its own rules, armed themselves with strip spikes, golf cart sirens, and phrases designed to sound legal but weren't. David knew what he had to do next. This wasn't a homeowner dispute anymore. It was time for the state to get involved. Would you trust these people with power? Drop a comment, hit that like, and subscribe because David just got the final piece of proof, and things are about to go public. When David Palmer received the community enforcement protocols in his inbox, he thought it might be a joke, but every page he turned made the reality clearer. This wasn't some overzealous board. This was a tactical operation. That night, David, Lisa, and Kyle sat around the dining room table with the manual printed out between them. Over 30 pages of what looked like a training guide for a neighborhood police force written by people who'd never passed a single law enforcement exam. David flipped to the section labeled Resident Response Tactics. Subsections included eye contact, intimidation without threat, checkpoint setup with visual legitimacy, handling hostile homeowners. HH's. Lisa raised an eyebrow. HH's. They gave us a label. Kyle leaned in. They're not acting like a board. They're acting like a militia. One paragraph stood out. When confronting a suspected violator, never use casual tone. Maintain upright posture. Do not allow the resident to dominate the conversation. End each interaction with, "This will be submitted for review." David scoffed. They've even got catchphrases, but the line that sealed it for him was at the very bottom of page 27. In the absence of law enforcement presence, it is the duty of HOA enforcement to preserve neighborhood order by any means deemed necessary. Lisa looked up slowly. By any means. The next morning, things escalated again, but this time it wasn't aimed at David, it was the preschool parking lot. Lisa had just dropped off Emily's younger cousin, Max, at a small private preschool on the edge of Sycamore Ridge. She walked back to her SUV and found a thin, black object tucked behind the rear tire. A spike strip, smaller than the one before. Half buried in gravel, she froze. Looked around, no HOA vehicle, no cameras, but the message was clear. When David arrived, Lisa was still standing there, arms crossed. Silent. David didn't ask questions, he just picked up the strip and placed it in a box in his trunk next to the manual, the video USB, and Kyle's folder of evidence. That night, they got a surprise visit. News anchor Holly Wren from Channel 6 stood at their door. "I saw your video," she said, holding up her phone. "Would you be willing to talk?" David hesitated. "On the record." She nodded. Kyle pulled him aside. "You wanted attention. You're about to get it. Just be smart." Lisa stood beside David and whispered, "Tell them everything. Let the public decide." That evening, Channel 6 aired the story, HOA or hostile. Local man says neighborhood security has gone too far. It showed the footage, the documents, the badges, the fake citations, everything edited into a 4-minute segment with tense music and a shocked anchor at the end. By morning, the HOA office voicemail box was full, and so was David's inbox. Half the neighborhood thanked him, the other half, silent, but not the board. At exactly 10:22 a.m., David received a certified letter. Final notice. You are in violation of the following. Public defamation of board authority, authorized distribution of internal documents, willful noncompliance with neighborhood order. You are hereby notified that your household is under review for community expulsion. You have 30 days to vacate the property or face legal action. Lisa read the letter and laughed. They're trying to evict us. David set it on fire in the kitchen sink. Kyle handed him a new folder. "I think it's time we showed this to the real authorities." David contacted the state attorney general's office and submitted a complaint under the HOA Regulation Act. He included the videos, emails, audit request, news coverage and the militia manual. The AG's office responded within 48 hours. An investigator named Veronica Trujillo was assigned. She requested a meeting at David's home. When she arrived, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This isn't just an abuse of authority," she said. "This is a blueprint for unauthorized law enforcement activity on residential grounds. It crosses into criminal territory." She promised immediate review and asked only one thing: stay visible. "We don't want them doing something stupid." David agreed, but part of him already knew. They would. What would you do if your HOA acted like a private army? Leave a comment, share your story, and subscribe, because next time, someone's getting arrested. When a neighborhood becomes a battlefield, the first casualty is trust. But when the aggressor wears a badge and hands you a fine, that's when it turns personal. For David Palmer, the fight against the rogue HOA had just gone from paperwork to outright warfare. And the retaliation. It didn't knock on the door, it crept in quietly. One sabotage at a time. 2 days after the state investigator visited, the HOA struck again. It started small. Lisa noticed their trash hadn't been picked up on Monday. But when she asked the neighbor across the street, hers had. Then it happened again Wednesday. By Friday, a foul smell had started drifting from the bins. Maggots. David called the waste company, who confirmed. "We were told by HOA admin that the address was suspended from collection due to unsafe conduct on property. We can't override HOA coordination." He nearly crushed his phone in his hand. Then came the water. Low pressure in the kitchen. Showers barely dripping. Toilets taking minutes to refill. David checked the main, nothing unusual. Then Kyle came by and traced the feed line. 50 feet from the main valve, buried under decorative HOA shrubbery near the sidewalk. They found a small clamp, a purpose-installed pressure reducer. Kyle looked at David grimly. This wasn't city work. David didn't reply. He just took a picture. Proof. Next, they came for the cars. Again, Lisa's tires were punctured again. But this time, they weren't slashed. They were stabbed. with 3 sharp holes, almost invisible unless closely inspected. All 4, David, installed motion sensors. The next night, they caught someone crouching behind the family sedan around 2:15 a.m. The man moved with familiarity. Knew where the cameras were. He wore a hoodie and gloves. David couldn't confirm the face but the body type. The shoes, it looked a lot like Martin Rhodes. Again, but even with all this, the worst part wasn't what was being done to David's family, it was what the neighbors weren't doing. People stopped waving, stopped replying to texts, stopped showing up to HOA meetings at all. Marcy Dash, the brave neighbor who agreed to testify, and apologized. "I'm sorry, David. I got a letter. Same kind you did, threatening me with communal removal if I continue to engage with outside media. I can't risk my job. I hope you understand." He did, because fear has a smell. And Sycamore Ridge was drowning in it. On Saturday morning, David walked into the HOA clubhouse to attend the monthly board meeting. He wasn't there to speak. He was there to watch. Carl Becker, Martin Rhodes, and Susan Tate sat at the long table wearing matching uniforms with the HOA crest embroidered on the sleeves. Behind them, 2 large men stood in tactical black outfits marked Enforcement Division. No one from the Sheriff's Department. Just HOA muscle. When Carl opened the floor, no one stood to speak. Not one question, not one complaint. Just silence. When David raised his hand, Carl didn't even look up. "Mr. Palmer, your privileges have been suspended pending review. Please exit the building or our enforcement division will assist." David remained seated, calm. "Let them try," he said. Carl nodded to the men behind him. They moved forward until David reached into his bag and pulled out a clipboard. "By the way," he said, "the State Attorney General's office has been watching this meeting since it began. Smile for the camera." He pointed to the corner, where a tiny red LED blinked from a mounted GoPro. Gasps erupted across the room. Someone in the back stood and walked out. Carl's smile cracked, just slightly. David stood slowly. "You might want to prepare your legal statements, because what you just did, that's obstruction in front of a state witness. Enjoy the paperwork." He turned and walked out, leaving behind stunned silence. The retaliation had gone far enough, but Carl, Martin, and Susan weren't finished yet. The next day, David and Lisa received a formal document via courier. Urgent board resolution, final, warning, due to persistent hostility, unauthorized surveillance, and external media engagement. The Palmer household is no longer deemed compatible with Sycamore Ridge standards. You have 30 days to vacate. If not, legal action will be initiated to enforce community stability. Signed, Sycamore Ridge Enforcement Board. Lisa read it aloud, then set it down. David stared at it for a long moment, then picked up his phone. He texted Veronica Trujillo at the state AG's office. "They've crossed the line. Ready when you are." She replied within seconds. "Stand by. We're coming." When a homeowners association tries to kick a family out of their own home, it stops being about property. It becomes a matter of justice, and David Palmer was done playing defense. The very next morning, an unmarked black SUV parked discreetly across from the Sycamore Ridge clubhouse. 3 plainclothes investigators stepped out, clipboards in hand. They didn't knock. They walked right in. Inside, Carl Becker and the board were holding a closed-door disciplinary hearing, supposedly to discuss David and Lisa's community expulsion. But they didn't expect the State Attorney General's office to walk in with subpoenas. Veronica Trujillo introduced herself calmly. "We're here for a full audit. Financials, security contracts, board communications. Start printing." Carl turned pale. Martin looked like someone had unplugged him. Susan started crying. By noon, the AG's team had copies of every HOA expense from the past 12 months. The documents revealed what David had long suspected. The HOA was paying Carl's private LLC Peacewell Safety Solutions $3,200 a month for enforcement coverage. It wasn't just a side gig, it was a siphon. Kyle sat beside David in his living room, going line by line through the spreadsheet. "Here," Kyle pointed, "golf cart upgrades, flashing lights, custom HOA tactical uniforms, $4,800. David blinked. "They used our dues to play dress up." Even worse, one transaction was labeled external pressure measures, special projects, amount, $1, dozo date. 2 days before Lisa's tires were slashed, Lisa stood at the sink, watching Max play in the yard. She turned to David. "They're going to jail, aren't they?" David didn't answer. But Kyle did. If there's any justice left, yeah. The next morning, a news van appeared outside their house again. This time, word had spread. Channel 6 had followed up with a new headline. HOA hit with state audit board members under investigation for fraud, impersonation. Clips of David's security footage rolled on screen, followed by interviews with neighbors, who'd been too scared to speak before. Now, they were stepping forward. Marcy appeared, face partially blurred. They told me I'd lose access to my home loan support if I didn't stop talking. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. Even an anonymous board member emailed David directly. They told us it was authorized. I didn't know it was illegal. The HOA's empire was crumbling fast by Thursday. The board issued a mass email to all residents. Due to recent disruptions and misinformation campaigns, Sycamore Ridge's HOA operations will temporarily cease non-essential enforcement functions. Translation: they were stalling, but the damage was already done. That afternoon, David received a knock on the door, not from a board member, but from a federal courier. Lisa opened it and accepted the envelope. DOJ letterhead. Inside, you are formally invited to submit a statement in support of the joint investigation between the State Attorney General's office and the U.S. Department of Justice regarding improper civilian authority and HOA abuse of funds. Lead investigator, Agent Thomas Vickers. David looked up at Lisa. Doge is in now. She smiled. Took them long enough. But just when things seemed to turn, David's phone buzzed. It was a text from a blocked number. A photo, grainy, taken at night. It showed David and Emily walking into the garage. Circled in red. A message followed. You're bringing a lot of heat, Palmer. Hope your family's ready. He stared at it. Jaw clenched. Guile called the sheriff immediately. We've crossed the line from HOA dispute to federal witness intimidation, he told the dispatcher. Understood, the officer replied. We'll keep an eye on the property. But David knew this was no longer about laws. It was about fear, about power, and about what people are willing to do when they think no one's watching. But now, the whole country was watching. And Carl Becker was finally sweating. For weeks, the Palmer family had lived under the rule of a fake badge. HOA board members turned enforcers, neighbors turned silent, and their street turned hostile. But now, it was time for real law enforcement to knock on the door. And this time, they weren't knocking on David's. It began early on a Tuesday, 6:43 a.m. Fog still clung to Sycamore Ridge. A black SUV pulled up quietly to the curb across from the HOA clubhouse. Then another. And another. By 6:50, 6 federal agents stood shoulder to shoulder at the HOA office entrance. Unmarked tactical vests. Radios clipped to shoulders. No nonsense. David, watching from his front lawn with coffee in hand, saw one familiar face step out from the lead vehicle. Agent Thomas Vickers. DOJ. Within minutes, the clubhouse door was opened with a warrant and a boot. Inside, the agents found Carl Becker, Martin Rhodes, and Susan Tate Midme. They were surrounded by papers, security footage on laptops, and what appeared to be training badges spread across the table. Carl stood up, still trying to maintain control. Excuse me, this is private property, Mr. Becker. Agent Vickers interrupted. You're under investigation for impersonating law enforcement, misuse of HOA funds, conspiracy to intimidate, and fraudulent contract procurement. Sit down. Carl sat. Martin tried to slip a flash drive into his pocket. Agent Ramirez intercepted him. Susan broke down in tears as the files were collected. Outside, curious residents gathered. Phones came out. Video rolled. By 7:15 a.m., the 3 board members were escorted outside in cuffs. David stood silently as Carl Becker passed by, face red, head lowered. For the first time since this all began, Carl said nothing, just the sound of handcuffs clicking. Kyle joined David on the curb. You hear what they found? He asked. David shook his head. A second set of spike strips, unused, and a list of watch properties. Yours, Lisa's daycare, Marcy's house, even mine. David's jaw clenched. They had a list. Kyle nodded. They were building a system, a surveillance model. None of it legal. The neighborhood buzzed, like a kicked beehive. Some residents cried. Some clapped. Others just stood in quiet disbelief as the HOA's enforcement squad was loaded into federal SUVs and driven off Sycamore Ridge for good. Channel 6 aired live footage within the hour. Breaking. Federal agents arrest HOA leaders in rogue enforcement scandal. Local headlines called it suburbia's private police force. Later that day, Lisa got a call from Marcy. "Thank you," Marcy whispered through tears. "I don't know what they would have done if you hadn't spoken out." Lisa smiled. "You don't have to thank us. Just don't let it happen again." David received a call too, but this one was from the interim city-appointed HOA advisor. "We're dissolving the current board," she said. "Would you consider taking a temporary position while we hold a special election?" David didn't hesitate. "I'll do it, but I want transparency. I want cameras in every meeting. And I want every dollar of dues posted publicly." "You'll have it." That night, David walked the length of Sycamore Ridge. The road was quiet again. No flashing lights. No checkpoints. Just trees, wind, and the sound of birds returning. He stopped near the bend where Emily's car had first hit the spike strips. There was still a small dent in the asphalt, like a scar. A reminder. Lisa joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. David nodded slowly. "For now." But just before midnight, Kyle called. His voice was grim. "Check the latest neighborhood filing," he said. David opened the city's permit portal and scrolled. A new private security application had been submitted, filed under a different company. ClearPath Community Watch, LLC. Submitted by Becker Carl. Lisa read over David's shoulder. "He's starting over." David leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Not on my watch." "What would you do if your HOA president came back under a new name?" "You'd think after arrests, public exposure, and federal intervention, the nightmare would end. But men like Carl Becker don't disappear quietly. They rebrand, they refile, and if you're not watching, they slip right back through the cracks." 2 weeks after the DOJ raid, Sycamore Ridge began to heal. Residents came out of their homes again. The clubhouse reopened, this time without bodyguards, and David Palmer was officially elected interim board president by unanimous vote. Transparency became the new rule. All meetings were streamed. At HOA financials were publicly posted, and those ridiculous enforcement uniforms burned in a fire pit behind the tennis court. Symbolic, cathartic. David thought it was over. Until the email arrived. The subject line read, "Permitting alert. Applicant flagged, Sycamore Ridge zip." Sent from Kyle's City Hall contact. David opened the attached document. A new HOA security proposal had been filed. Not through Sycamore Ridge but through a neighboring subdivision, Creekstone Glen. New name, new LLC, ClearPath Community Watch. Filed by Christopher Bayelker. David stared at the signature. Lisa leaned in. "Who's that?" He squinted, then widened his eyes. "It's Carl." Just scrambled his name. C.B. Elker. Carl Becker had created a new persona. He'd filed as a consultant. Creekstone Glen's smaller, newer, with fewer outspoken residents was his fresh target, and he nearly got away with it. David called Kyle, who was already on it. "They've approved the first step," Kyle said. "Signed off on patrol training. Same language as the fake militia manual. Same spike strip inventory, quote. Do they know his past?" David asked. "Nope. He listed no criminal record. And since charges are pending, not convicted," David sighed. "So legally, he's clean on paper." That night, David put out a video. His last one in the saga, a 10-minute expose titled, "The HOA Tyrant Returns, Carl Becker's New Alias Uncovered." It opened with footage of Carl's arrest, then the permit, documents, then a side-by-side of C.B. Elker and Carl's arrest photo. Within hours, it had 300,000 views, then 500,000. Carl Becker started trending. Residents from Creekstone Glen flooded the comments. "This guy tried to set up a security force here. I signed a petition supporting him. What? Can we file to block this?" The power of exposure worked fast. Faster than Carl anticipated. Within 48 hours, ClearPath Community Watch's permit was revoked. And then came the final twist. An anonymous email sent directly to David. Subject, HOA asset dump. "You need to see this." Inside the Dropbox link was a folder full of emails between Carl, Martin, and Susan. Some from months before the first spike strip. In one message, Carl bragged, "Once we control access and response, we control behavior. People comply with uniforms. We can push policy without asking." Another said, "Palmer's wife is the soft target. Get into her car. Make her scared enough, he'll fold." Lisa read that one. quietly walked outside, and threw up in the bushes. David took the folder straight to Agent Vickers. The evidence was airtight, premeditated, coordinated. Cruel. The DOJ officially filed federal charges the following week. Impersonation of law enforcement, misuse of HOA funds, intimidation of a federal witness, fraud across jurisdictions. Carl Becker was arrested again, this time, for real. Months passed. Sycamore Ridge thrived under new leadership. HOA dues dropped. Surveillance was removed. And neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started hosting barbecues. David and Lisa were no longer feared. They were respected. And in the end, it wasn't a courtroom that gave them closure. It was a package, a box left on their porch. No return address. Inside was one item. A shattered plastic badge, the fake Sycamore Ridge Enforcement Division emblem. Underneath it, a note typed in bold. Not every uniform makes you right. David tossed it in the trash without a word. If your HOA ever starts acting like a government, remember this: power only works when people stay silent. Comment below. Have you seen an HOA cross the line? Hit like, share this story, and always keep the cameras rolling, because you never know who's watching.